Hello, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec podcast. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, advisor, consultant, tech execs worldwide, and the guy to help you triple impact peer engineer. And today we're going to be talking about parallel realities. Before I start, I have a quick ask. Till October 7th, when the war started over here, about 4 months ago now, I used to release a weekly 2-minute video with a small, bite-sized, actionable lesson for leaders. I've stopped when the war started, and now I'm wondering if I should get back to it. And I'd really appreciate it if you found those useful. If you could take a second and write me an email saying so. My email's in the show notes. I'm just trying to make sure I'm not wasting my time doing something that not enough people find valuable. So thank you for that. And now let's talk about parallel realities. I sometimes feel like that a lot of the impact I can drive for companies is simply because I'm external and it's amazing. And how much sometimes our communication patterns have become so screwed up over time that we cannot even do basic things sometimes, and we need someone external to help us fix it. And that's what I mean when I talk about parallel realities. When I talk to two different people from the same company who were in the same meeting and I get different impressions. And this is not, one party trying to gaslight me. This is about really two people who were in the same room but experienced things so differently. This is such a unique contrast between how things work as coders, because you know that if you wrote it, the compiler, the runtime environment is gonna always understand it the same, as opposed to how things go with people. The same words hit differently for different people. And for example, I was recently talking to two executives, and both of them had such a different takeaway from a confrontation that they had. Both of them really value the other. Both of them really want to solve this. And yet, they both felt like at the end of the discussion, like, he only wants me gone. As in, they both felt like this is just, I'm being pushed out by the other person. And yet, when I talked to them, both of them, what they really wanted was to make sure things work out. And this is something that I saw in that example of executives. I recently saw something similar with a couple of co-founders. And this is such an example of how we try and add additional meaning to words, or we choose bad words to convey our message. And what happens then is that we, at that point, at that meeting, we seem to have a splitting off of realities, where each of us goes off on a separate ways, and in our minds, we have a different version of what happened, meaning that we are now, like code, branching out, and things start to spiral out of control, unless we somehow find a way to merge, and hopefully you don't have a conflict. Sorry if I'm pushing the metaphor too much. And another example would be when I talk to teams and I ask them to tell me what are the most important priorities for the company, what are you focusing on right now? And when I ask that in front of an all hands, I usually get one person, say the CEO, to tell me, and everyone nods. However, if I do it differently and ask each person individually, guess what? I usually get a lot more different responses. And that shows me how lack of a coherence there is in the leadership, or that so many people disagree with the stated direction of the company. And again, we have parallel realities. And one last example before we start talking about how this affects you is when you talk about things as simple as technical solutions. I recently talked to a company about a problematic server issue they had. And I just asked point blank, it sounds like this is such a heavy, old, hard to maintain piece of software. Help me for a second to understand what we're talking about. If I just now told you you have the time, how long would it take you to just rewrite this? One person said 6 months. The other felt like this actually should take like 2 weeks. And that's quite a gap, right? And again, parallel realities. And what does this boil down to? First of all, I hope that by talking about this right now, I might be making you aware of the fact that this is happening. It might just have happened to you in the last conversation you ended up before listening to this episode. And what I want you to consider is whenever you're conveying a message, are you sure that what you said, what you meant to say, is what the other party understood? Or did they leave the room picking up a different story? And this is sometimes whenever I start working one-on-one with an executive, I have this 8 traits self-assessment that we do, and I ask specifically about communication. How often does it happen that you later realize that what you meant to say is not what the other party understood, or vice versa? And this is a crucial part in making sure that we're not living in parallel realities. We have to make ourselves aware of this as it is happening to reduce the amount of times it happens, either by us triggering others to go into a parallel universe, or by us going away from a conversation, misunderstanding something. But further, it's not just about that. What I want you to realize is this can be an amazing point of leverage. So I think that what we're getting oftentimes comes from a lot of diversity, which is good. You're seeing people who have different backgrounds, different ways of looking at things, different priorities, and if we make them, help them speak up, we might find new ways of doing things, better ways. For example, when I sit together, the one who thought a rewrite takes 6 months and the one who thought it should take 2 weeks, we might find that there is a clear gap here, and yeah, actually we can cut a lot of the craft there and do it a lot quicker, or we find that things are more complex and people now will be able to at least work better together, or we find somewhere in between. That's all fine, but we get something that's better than what we had before the conversation. Another example would be whenever you're having these conversations with your leaders, with the managers under you, for example, I want you to be aware of the fact that if you're not getting enough of these parallel realities, different ways of looking at things, you either are creating a team that's too homogenous, a team that doesn't have enough diversity, and specifically when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about diversity of thought. I want people who look at things differently. I don't want everyone to have the same background, having had worked together for 5 companies now, and therefore are always seeing things the same, because then I'm just getting cloned. I want people who think differently, especially at management and leadership roles, so that we get more ideas, we get some good, healthy, contrarian thoughts. And if you notice this isn't happening, either you need to spice things up with your team, or you're lacking in creating the right safety for them to speak up. And this is more important than anything else. If you don't create this, your team will not really be managers. They would just be waiting to hear what you want to do and nodding along, like the story about that CEO. And I don't think this is what you want. I don't think this is how you create a team that you're proud of leading, right? When they come up with their own ideas, when they have enough safety and the chutzpah to come to you and tell you that your idea doesn't make sense, or that your strategy is actually wrong because it misses on a crucial point, that's golden. That's exactly what we want. And you need to create this. So for this week, your takeaway is consider, when are you allowing yourself to maintain these parallel realities unnecessarily because you have some thought or because you haven't been clear enough? And 2, consider, are you vocal enough? Are you cultivating a culture where people can speak about this, so we see all of these different branches in thought and are able to efficiently merge them as needed? That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. As always, if you want to get some more, check out my newsletter, link in the show notes, and I'll be here next week. Thanks.